So in tonight's philosophical concept, we're going to be talking about a very topical issue, which is the whataboutism. So I want to talk about what a whataboutism is, and most importantly, what it is not, so you can hopefully better understand what the whataboutism actually is. Now, this is a really short video because there's really not much to a whataboutism. A whataboutism is where you effectively use the wrongdoings of someone else to either justify your own wrongdoing or to provide cover from your own wrongdoing, to dismiss your own wrongdoing or claims thereto. So the classic example of this is when one brother points out the wrongdoings of another brother to justify their own wrongdoings. Well, he got to steal from the cookie jar, so I'm going to steal from the cookie jar. And although the parent might be full-on hypocritical in the enforcement of the stealing from the cookie jar, that kind of belies the point. The kid in this case, who's justifying the stealing of the cookie jar, knows at a deep and moral level that his brother who stole from the cookie jar was wrong to steal from the cookie jar. So if he was morally principled, if he was consistent, he would say that he should not steal from the cookie jar because the principle that underlies this is that stealing or deceit in some manner is a bad thing. So the reason this comes up as being topical is because of, well, what's happened with the January 6th riots. The principle that would allow you to have a consistent standpoint from a moral perspective with the riots on January 6th and the riots that were basically the headline outside of COVID from 2020 would be that rioting, looting, violence, destruction of property are bad things. So I can say that the BLM riots were bad. Also, the riots on January 6th were bad. And we can move on. Now, if the other side of the proverbial political aisle does nothing but provide cover for or justify what was going on previously in 2020, and then is also supposedly morally outraged because of the riots from January 6th, you have a situation where one side of the political aisle, which has been consistently against rioting, looting, violence, etc., and destruction of property, can say, whoa. You're exhibiting crocodile tears and you're exhibiting hypocrisy. So we're going to call you on your hypocrisy, and we're going to say, you know what? We don't think that your outrage is genuine. So to break this down, I've tried to put together some charts that hopefully we won't have to fix in editing to get to work properly. So this is merely calling out hypocrisy. This is not engaging in whataboutism. So in this case, as I bring up my Excel here, Party A says that when it is a convenient situation to their politic, so the January 6th riots, they can call it a bad thing. When it's not convenient, they still call it a bad thing. So in this case, when it's not convenient to call it a bad thing, they call it a bad thing. When it's convenient to call it a bad thing, they call it a bad thing. So in the case of the BLM riots, if we call Party A the Republican Party, they're going to call the bad thing bad, and it happens to also be convenient to call it bad. Also on January 6th, they're going to call it bad, even though it's inconvenient to their politic to call it bad. And what this results in, if we mix our red and our red, is a consistent policy, and that's because we have a principle that underlies the thing. And this is actually the root of why whataboutisms are actually really bad, and that's because without a principle to underlie your actual politic or your decision-making, you're making your decision-making entirely ad hoc, and that can lead to some really dangerous situations. This is actually what's led to basically the justification of every genocide that has ever existed. The unprincipled politic of those who engage in that sort of thing allows them to then justify genocide. And this is an example of how you could justify a bad thing, a whataboutism. And we're going to get to what that actually is in just a second. So in the case of Party B, in the case of the BLM riots, it was kind of convenient to say that it was good. So they said it was good. And when it was not convenient to say it was good, they said it was bad. So in this case, in the case of the BLM riots, I actually kind of had this backwards, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that if you add the green and the red, you get inconsistency. And it is perfectly okay to be morally outraged at both the BLM riots and the January 6th riots and then call out this inconsistency. So in this case, in this chart, the thing that's actually happening is a calling out of inconsistency. So if we go, that is what's happening. This right here, the inconsistency. All that's happening is that, right? So now we're going to go into what is an whataboutism. So remember, in the calling out hypocrisy, we're not operating within the four squares. We're operating outside of the four squares. Okay. Because what we're focusing on is this inconsistency, not what's in the four squares. So let's now go into what is a whataboutism. And let's see if this lined up nicely. All right. That was really hard, and it shouldn't have been that hard. So in this case, Party A has a situation where it is convenient to their politic. But they call it bad. And they have a situation where it's not convenient to their politic. Where it is convenient to their politic to call it bad. So they call it bad. And they have a situation where it's not convenient to call it bad. So they call it good. In this case, in Party B, they have a situation which is convenient to their politic to call it good. So they call it good. And when in a situation where it's not convenient to their politic to call it good, so they call it bad. In this case, both of them, when you add red to green, you get inconsistent. So in this case, this is a whataboutism. Party B says it's perfectly okay for BLM to riot. And then it says, but it's bad for the rioters on January 6th. So then what Party A does is says, let's say they were in 2020, the BLM riots were bad. Okay, now January 6th comes around. And Party A says, well, you've got this inconsistency here. So we're going to use that to justify the riots on January 6th. We're going to use that to say nothing to see here. So this is a really important distinction to make because Party A has basically said, we know Party B is doing the bad thing, but we're going to also do the bad thing. We talked about Hanlon's razor in another video, which I'll link to in this video's description. There's a certain degree of even worse that's associated with the whataboutism. It is bad that Party B is inconsistent and is applying an ad hoc rule. It is even worse that Party A knows that that is bad and they're going to do the exact same thing. So it's a little bit worse that the kid who is stealing from the cookie jar knows that what he is doing is bad versus the kid who may not know what he is doing is bad. So it's entirely plausible that somebody who is inconsistent on something doesn't realize that they're being inconsistent on something, doesn't realize that what they're engaging in is unprincipled action, that their decision-making is being made entirely ad hoc. The whataboutism is even worse than that because you're doing the same thing and you know it's bad. So there's a reason that lying is considered a bad thing. It's because not only are you purveying an untruth, you're purveying an untruth that you know to be untrue. And this is going to get us kind of to an axiomatic argument, something where we really are arguing from an a prioristic standpoint. There's no great way to say why knowing that you're engaging in bad is worse than unknowingly engaging in bad. It's just something we've kind of come to accept, and there's no great logical way to explain that. There is some circuitous way to do a logical explanation as to why knowingly doing something wrong is worse than unknowingly doing something wrong. But it's also something we kind of know just from our legal system. When you accidentally kill somebody, it's manslaughter. When you deliberately kill somebody, it's murder. And the penalties for manslaughter are not the penalties for murder. So hopefully that clears up what a whataboutism is and what it isn't. Hopefully you guys can put that information to use in your daily life. I've given you a few examples of where that seems to pop up. And hopefully you've all enjoyed this too. And we will see you in the next one. Good night, folks.